Every time I prepare to record something outside of my studio, whether it's a video at someone else's studio, a trade show interview, or a location recording, the same exact thought crosses my mind. Am I forgetting something? In my own studio, this isn't an issue. I have all of my microphones, I have as many cables as I'll need, and if I should need something unexpected, it's right there in my closet. But if I forget something and I'm recording on location, there's no going to the closet to get what I need. And that's a stressful thought when preparing for what to take with me. So I thought it would be a good idea to walk through my thought process for what I bring when I'm recording something in an unfamiliar location. Today, I'm preparing to go to my friend Ernesto's house to help him record some videos for his Instagram, where he makes drum remixes and tutorials. And everything I need will need to fit inside this backpack. By the way, thanks to Adam Audio for sponsoring this video and supporting audio education. You can find links to everything I mentioned today in the description below the video. Now, the first thing I usually think about when preparing for a location recording is, what am I recording? And the answer to that question is a combination of how many instruments there are, how I want the recordings to sound, and the production method I want to use. So let's think through each of these one at a time. Now, in some cases, such as when I'm recording interviews at a trade show, I don't have the ability to carry around a laptop and an interface. So in those cases, I choose to use a portable battery-powered recorder. You won't always need a lot of microphones to record a lot of instruments. For example, if you're recording an orchestra or a choir on location, you don't necessarily need as many mics as you have performers on stage. In most cases, in fact, you'll record the ensemble as a whole using only 2 or 3 microphones. On the other hand, you could be recording only a few performers and end up needing dozens of microphones. How many microphones you bring has just as much to do with how you want the recording to sound as it does with how many instruments you're recording. For a classical ensemble, you might choose to let the musicians themselves create the blend and capture the sound of the musicians in the room from a distance. This is a much different approach than you might take with a rock or pop group, where you want closer sounding recordings and more control of the blend and character of each instrument during the mixing phase. Another important factor is the production method. If you plan to record a full band live with everyone performing their instrument at the same time, you'll tend to need more microphones and more inputs that you can use simultaneously. Meanwhile, you could create a full production with very few microphone inputs if you plan to layer each part one at a time or use virtual instruments. For this particular situation that I'm in, I will need to record Ernesto's drum set, which consists of a snare, a bass, a rack tom, a floor tom, and some cymbals. In theory, I could pack my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, which would give me 2 microphone inputs, and I could pack 2 microphones to act as either drum overheads or a stereo pair in front of the drum kit. And while that might be a good fit for a certain style of drumming, in this case, I think I'm going to want at least some close microphones, particularly on the snare and bass drum. And in order to do that, I'll need an interface with at least 4 microphone inputs. Now, I could take this idea to the extreme and put a microphone on the top of the snare, the bottom of the snare, the outside of the kick, the inside of the kick, put a microphone on each tom, and put microphone on the hi-hat, and also use stereo overheads and stereo room microphones all at the same time. That would require not only more microphones, but it would also require more inputs on the interface. If I chose to do it that way, I would probably bring the same 4-channel interface that I'm thinking about bringing, but also bring a ADAT-enabled preamp that would allow me to record a total of 12 microphones simultaneously. In that case, I would have the 8-channel preamp sending 8 channels into this optical input, and then I would be able to use these 4 inputs that are on the interface itself. Now, in my case, that would be the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 and the Focusrite Scarlett 18i20, because that's what I already have. Those are both audio interfaces that can be connected to a computer with USB directly, but in this scenario, I'd only use the 18i8 as an interface, and I'd be using the 18i20 as a preamp. Now, the 18i8 has been discontinued since I bought it, and you don't necessarily need an interface like the 18i20 if you only intend to use it in this configuration. If you were building this on your own with new gear, you could use any 4-channel interface with an ADAT input, such as the Scarlett 18i16, and any ADAT-enabled mic preamp, like the Focusrite Scarlett Octo Pre. And while I have done this in the past, paired the 8-channel ADAT preamp with a 4-channel interface to record a lot of microphones on the drums at the same time, in this particular case, more microphones might just create more problems. See, Ernesto is making a drum tutorial for Instagram, and I think we can get a good sound with a pair of overhead mics, like these small diaphragm condensers, and a snare mic, and a kick mic. I think that'll give us the sound we need, and fewer mics means Ernesto will have less to mix later on, which will help him be more consistent in making the videos without sacrificing much on sound quality. Plus, it means I can fit everything I need in this backpack, and I'm only halfway through the thought process. I've covered capturing the sound from the sources, my inputs, but I still need to consider where sound needs to go during the session, my outputs, and how I'm going to get sound to those outputs. In any recording situation, you're going to need to hear what the recording sounds like. This is something that can be particularly challenging when recording on location. In my studio, I can go to a completely separate room, turn on my studio monitors, and monitor the microphones that are placed on instruments downstairs in my basement. This setup is really nice because the walls between my control room and my tracking room provide isolation that's necessary to hear what's coming from the speakers without hearing too much direct sound from the instruments themselves. Plus, this room I'm in is very nicely treated, and I'm familiar with the space, so I can feel confident that I'm hearing the recordings accurately. When you're recording something on location, there are times when you can set up in a separate room, and if that's possible, it's definitely worth it in many cases, for those exact reasons. However, it's more often the case that you'll need to set up in the same space where you're recording. That means the sound from the instruments will be pretty loud at the location where you're monitoring your recordings. That can make accurate monitoring very difficult. Not to mention the fact that you'll be in an unfamiliar space. In this case, I know Ernesto's house pretty well, and I know I'm going to need to set up basically right in front of his drum kit. And this means having a pair of isolation headphones will be very important. That's why I'll be using these closed-back headphones that are also over-ear headphones, so I can put the headphones on and listen to the microphones with a decent amount of isolation. The Atom H200s have about 40 dB of passive attenuation above 4 kilohertz, so this is what I'll use to listen while Ernesto is performing and while doing a line check. However, from past experience, I know that drums always sound different when they're coming out of speakers versus headphones, so I'm also going to pack a pair of Atom D3V studio monitors, which I won't use while Ernesto is playing, because I'll be in the same room, but I will be able to make a test recording and then play it back to hear if it translates well to monitors. These particular monitors are going to be very convenient because I won't need to bring any stands for them. They come with these little desk stands that I can put on here, and it allows me to tilt them upward toward my ears. And that'll be on the tabletop right in front of me. So that proximity to the monitors, in addition to these compensation switches for the room, will allow me to monitor and mitigate any acoustic problems with the room I'll be working in. But it's not just me who needs to hear. When you're recording musicians on location, there are cases where you'll need to provide a monitor mix for those musicians as well. This isn't always the case. In some situations, the musicians will be very familiar with hearing each other in the room, but in some cases, you'll need to provide a headphone mix for the performers. In this case, that can be easily accomplished by just connecting a second pair of headphones to the second output on the interface that I'm using. Or I could use a pair of line outputs on the back of the interface to connect to a headphone amplifier that would power Ernesto's headphones. If you had several musicians all performing at once who needed to hear a monitor mix, you would probably need to use some sort of headphone distribution amplifier. In that case, you could take a pair of line outputs on the interface to the distribution amp, and that would power several sets of headphones all at once, each with their own volume control depending on the distribution amp. And if you needed different mixes for each of those musicians, you would need to create those mixes on these different line outputs on your interface. And then those would each connect to a separate headphone amplifier that then gets routed to each musician's headphones. Now, everything I've talked about so far has been in the context of recording on location. Location recording does come with its own unique challenges, but at its core, what you need to bring is the same as what you need for any home studio setup. That's why I created the home studio checklist that you can download in the description below the video, or by going to audiouniversityonline.com/home studio checklist. In that guide, you'll find the essential elements that you need to produce music wherever you are. Okay, let's get back to the next part of the preparation process. Now that I've considered the number of inputs and outputs and the interface that will be used to tie all that together, it's time to consider the less exciting items that are going to make this whole system work. For one, I'm going to need an XLR cable for every microphone I intend to use. And in this case, that means I need 4 XLR microphone cables. If I were setting up in a room away from the microphones, I would also want to bring a snake. That would allow me to put a snake head near the instruments and use XLR cables to connect the microphones. And then one long multi-cable snake would go to my mixing location where it would fan out into my interface. But in this case, that won't be necessary because I plan to set up right next to the drum kit. To connect my interface to the monitors, I'm going to use 2 short 1/4-inch TRS cables, one for the left speaker and one for the right speaker. And I'll also pack a headphone extension cable that has 1/4-inch TRS male on one end and 1/4-inch TRS female on the other end, so I can extend the cable from the headphone output to Ernesto's headphones. In addition to mic cables, I'm also going to need a mic stand for many of these microphones. This is one reason I like to use these clamp microphones that just clip right onto the drum head itself. That saves me from needing to bring an additional mic stand. But for the kick and for the overheads, I'm going to need stands. So that means I'll need to bring 1 short stand and 2 tall overhead mic stands. Now, those aren't going to fit inside this backpack, which is why I'm keeping the number of stands I need to a minimum. I usually also bring at least a pouch of adapters, just in case I end up needing them. Some of the essentials inside here are XLR turnarounds, which are male-to-male or female-to-female adapters, and XLR to 1/4-inch in both directions. And of course, none of this is going to work if I don't have power. So I'm going to make sure that I pack at least 1 power strip and 1 extension cord. That way, even if there isn't conveniently located power on site, I know that I'm somewhat prepared. Now, all of this could fit into a backpack except the mic stands, which would have me covered. But if the stakes were higher, and if I were traveling a further distance, I'd probably choose to take both a backpack like this with the gear plus a work box, which has other things like cable testers, power testers, more adapters, and things that I've picked up over the years of making mistakes and forgetting things. It's better to be safe than sorry. You can find a link to a video I made that walks through my full work box in the description below the video. Now, as bad as that anxious feeling is, wondering if I have everything before walking out the door, the relief that comes with pressing record once it's all set up and working, and the fulfillment of seeing the musician's face when they hear the recording for the first time, makes it all worth it. Thanks again to Atom Audio for sending over the D3V and the H200s and supporting our channel. You can find links to everything that I've mentioned here in the description below the video. Ernesto is actually going to be setting up a system of his own by the time this video is posted. So you can find a link to his Instagram below if you want to check out what he's working on and what he's working with today. In the next video that's on your screen now, we'll look at the differences you can expect between headphones and a full system with acoustic treatment, studio monitors, and a subwoofer. You don't have to have everything to get started, but it's definitely helpful to understand what you're missing at each level so you can adapt accordingly. I'll see you there.